You're listening to the Footy First podcast on TSN 1050. Champions live here.
That music means one thing on a Saturday, folks. It is time for Footy First here on TSN 1050. Nick McVicar, Niko Giantsopoulos here. And Niko, normally, when we come in on a Saturday, we banter a little bit. I ask you how the weather is. You say awful. I ask you how your week's been. You're in training camp. Normally, I would ask you about that. That's not really where we're going today. Because last night, at about 5 o'clock, we started seeing these rumblings around the Twitterverse and the Instagram social circles that there might be some disconnect in the women's national program. And then you sent me Jordan Heidema's post, and I was reading through that. And literally, as I finished reading that post and going through everything and watching the Bontis video at the end, I got an email from the TSN people. Rick Westhead has a one-on-one interview with Christine Sinclair and Janine Becky. I was like, what is going on? 45 minutes later, the video goes out, and Canada's women's national team's on strike. Not where I thought this show was going, my friend.
Oh, we had to scrap our original idea, throw it out the window, but that's journalism.
That's journalism. It was a mess, but it's journalism. And now here we are. And there's a lot that we're going to break down today. We're going to get into what got us to this point. We're going to get to what we can expect moving forward, hopefully. And we're going to get into some of the nitty-gritty of why we're even here. Because those are three different conversations, really, in my head. But let's start to how we got to this point. Last night on TSN, Rick Westhead had the interview with Janine Becky and Christine Sinclair, and they came out and said, basically, the women's team is not going to partake in any more Canada soccer activities until, A, their needs are met, or a legitimate conversation starts happening, which sounds like it hasn't been happening for the last few months, because this goes back to last year around, I think it was May or June, when the men's team sat out a Nations League game. And we talked about that the entire show and how important those games are, right? Because they're the ones that qualify you for Gold Cup, and they're the ones that qualify you for World Cups down the line. Like, obviously not 2026 because we're kind of qualified for that, but still, those are big games. And now the women, since the men's World Cup, apparently haven't had any direct conversation with Canada Soccer. And when they asked about them this week when they got into camp, there was no conversation had, even an emergency meeting. And actually, I want to play what Christine Sinclair said on the interview, because I think it was well said. She was asked, like, what does this mean? Like, are you guys going to be training? Like, what's the situation here? And this is what Christine had to say.
You know, we arrived into camp 3 days ago. We've trained the past 2 days. Some of us trained today with our shirts inside out. But the fact that we haven't heard from the CSA since we put in our demands, they haven't even had the courtesy to reach out to us to schedule an emergency call, anything like that. As a team, we've decided to take job action, and from this moment on, we'll not be participating in any Canadian Soccer Association activities until this is resolved. So whether that's training, whether that's games, that's very hard to say as an athlete.
Yeah, that's where we're at right now. They're not going to train. They are not going to play in games. Remember that big stink I made like 3 or 4 weeks ago, Niko, about why we don't have a training camp ahead of the She Believes Cup, which we play the American team in the first game. Like, it's a big deal. It's an invitation-only tournament. Like, we shouldn't be messing around with that, right? Well, now we know that the budget once again got cut for both men's and women's national programs, because the men came out and said a statement after that their budget got cut too. So the questions come out really quickly. Like, why is the budget cut? Where is this money going? Right? And I want to get you in on this because I've been talking a lot and I feel bad.
No, don't feel bad. You're explaining it well.
Back in 2021, the women did a good job and they posted the revenues and expenses for the last 2021-2020, because 2022, I guess they probably didn't have the sheet because it looks like Canada Soccer actually sends them out in 2-year increments. So it would be 2022-2023 would be the next 2-year increment. So we don't have last year's.
That's kind of poor, and if that's true,
I agree.
that's CSA.
Well, I'm sure they're available, but I mean those like templates that the women's and the men's team both kind of posted the last couple of days, because we also had the one from 2018 and 2019, right? So it looks like they're just posting those in 2-year increments. It's available. Don't get me wrong. It is available. I just don't have it right now.
The first thing that comes to mind when we're explaining this story is it seems like transparency between the players
there's
and
none.
CSA is so far off, and then it's now exploded into this huge problem. But I think it comes from the start is transparency and just lack of communication. Sinclair even says it there. It's like they haven't even given them a courtesy call and
an emergency. This is an emergency. Our national team is not playing games ahead of a national team.
They made it an emergency. The players probably been thinking this is an emergency for a long time.
Well, they thought it was an emergency before the World Cup. Remember when there was legitimate talk that the men's team might not play because of naming rights and the funding that they were getting and not being able to bring their families and everything?
Not playing what?
There was talk that they might not play at the World Cup, which we knew they were going to play, but
CSA definitely knew they were. But
there was legitimate concerns then, right? And it sounds like since then they haven't really addressed it. Now CSA came out with a statement, and I'll read it quickly because, well, A, it's not very long, and B,
it's important.
It's important, but I don't know how much to believe of it either. So I'm going to read it. We'll talk about it after. Pay equity for our women's national team is at the core of our, I can't even read this for some reason, ongoing player negotiations. Canada Soccer will not agree to any deal without it. That is why, after months of negotiations with our women's national team, players, and their legal counsel, Canada Soccer already issued a mutually agreed to retroactive payment. We have also previously informed our women's national team that the Friends and Family program granted to our men's national team in Qatar will be replicated for our women at the 2023 World Cup in Australia and New Zealand. This is real change in action, but there is more to do. To continue that important work, we need to have a collective bargaining agreement, which we agree on, me and Niko, in place to responsibly plan for the future. We presented an equity-based proposal to our national teams and their council several months ago, and we are still waiting for a definitive response to the terms of that proposal. Canada Soccer and our legal counsel will meet with the women's national team in Orlando tomorrow morning. This came out yesterday, so they're potentially meeting right now, as agreed to last Sunday, to continue our discussions. We want to get this resolved for both of our national teams and for Soccer Canada. So we hear that, and yet both national teams in their statements kind of said that we haven't heard from Canada Soccer. So there is one side's lying, and I'm not sure which side it is, and I'm not going to paint either side as the liar because, A, we don't know. But the fact that one side is saying they haven't met and one side is saying, oh, no, we've met, we've tabled proposals, there's something's not right.
It's like a classic high school drama.
It is.
He said, she said.
It is. It's the weirdest thing because it is the national program. Like, there's no way that this should be happening on the national stage.
And when you read that statement, when Canada Soccer says they have given a proposal to the national teams and they haven't gotten a response back, you told me that that is not true, or the women's team is saying that's not true?
Again, from what I'm hearing, it's not true. Like, they may have proposed one, but from what I heard is that both sides said no to that right away, and they haven't heard anything since. Now, again, we're not in the negotiation, so I'm not trying to, again, I don't want to paint anybody in the wrong light, but that's what I'm hearing, and it's just a mess right now that we're at this situation ahead of a major international tournament in the She Believes Cup, which is an invitation-only thing, and a Women's World Cup. Like, this is not the time to be having issues, and yet 2 years in a row ahead of major international tournaments, we're having issues with Canada Soccer.
With all the information that's now fully on the table, is it safe to say that the reason why there wasn't a camp in this window was because of the budget cuts that Canada Soccer did?
Absolutely.
It wasn't the women's or men's team kind of saying, no, we don't want to do it because...
100% is budget cuts because as you heard in there, like the women got to camp 3 days ago because that's when they were told to come. Mm-hmm. When they got there, they weren't. It's not the normal camp conditions that they were used to from years past, which doesn't make sense to me.
And we need hopefully more of this story comes out. Hopefully more national team players are speaking. Players that are in the camp are living this day-to-day life.
Yeah.
What is not normal circumstances
exactly.
mean?
And we don't know, but it's not what they expected at a major training camp for a tournament, right? Which that raises questions, that raises flags.
But that is also a gray area, and again,
100%.
a bit playing devil's advocate because what is normal? If they were just happened to have higher expectations, and then when they showed up, the expectations weren't met, sometimes that's a bit different. Me as an athlete, sometimes if I go into a new year with a new club, I could have expectations. Oh, it's going to be like this, and that, and then it's just not.
100%. And I get what you're saying, but they just had a camp in 2022. I think it was September that we were talking about the women's games then. Either September or October. I can't remember off the top of my head. So they just went through a camp. So they have a general idea of what it's supposed to look like. It's not like it's a new thing.
But that's what I'm saying. If they're going it off the last camp and it's different, for sure, immediate red flags.
So that's why
I'm
wondering.
But if it's only off of they feel like it's a World Cup year, they rightfully so, even in a way that their expectations should be higher, and then those aren't met, then that's a bit different.
Yeah, 100%. But I do believe that the reason that there wasn't one earlier, because that was your original question, is because of the budget cuts. And the fact that they've cut the budget twice in the last 2 years, that also raises red flags to me, because what I was trying to get at before is that in 2021, if you look at the expense report versus the revenue report, there was an excess of $5 million. And yet in 2022, Canada Soccer, do you remember in the summer when the men's team missed the game, they complained that, well, we won't have enough funding to fund all the national programs. So they were cutting, they were seriously talking about having to cut the futsal program completely and some of the youth programs. And I'm like, that doesn't make sense now. Now that I've seen the expense report, that doesn't make sense, because there's $5 million that you had excess after 2021. And you just got $10 million extra dollars that you weren't expected to get at the beginning of 2022 in 2022.
But Canada Soccer said they would have to not fund all the other national team programs. They wouldn't adequately be able to fund those programs only if they met the needs and the wants of the national team for the money pool that they earned from the World Cup.
$10 million. But there was $5 million extra from 2021. So where is that $5 million going? And we'll get into that on the other side, because we got to take a break. But I'm starting to get confused with statements coming from both sides. And that's where the biggest issue is.
It's transparency right now.
Exactly.
As we break it down throughout this episode, I'm just going to be yelling out key terms I think
it's true.
Are notable.
It's true. Transparency is the biggest issue. So we're going to take a break. On the other side, we'll break this down a little bit more, get into some of the nitty-gritty stuff, and then later in the show, we will break down what it could mean moving forward for both men's and women's teams. You're listening to Footy First here on TSN 1050. Welcome back to Footy First here on TSN 1050. Nick McVicar, Niko Giantsopoulos here. And before the break, we were talking about the excess money from 2021 and where it's gone, because we really don't know. And that's the biggest issue right now, is transparency, because there doesn't seem to be a direct connect between Canada Soccer and the national programs. We can agree on that, right, Niko?
Yeah, so far the two questions that I have after hearing the stories are, why are the budgets being cut? And then where is that excess $5 million gone?
Yeah, and I would love to see the 2022 one when it comes, because it usually takes about a month or two after the end of the year to get all the money accounted for.
Tax season.
Well, that too, right? But I want to know what the 2022 revenue and expenses looks like. Because if there's an excess in that too, we have some serious questions that need to be answered. But if it's negative and it's maybe like $4 million, well, okay, now we know where that extra $5 million from 2021 went. But I doubt that's going to be the case, because we just made an extra $10 million that we weren't expecting.
Do we know for a fact that no one of the players have seen the expense reports?
I'm sure they might have, but usually, like, So the way it usually works for these kind of organizations, and you've been in many of them, so you probably know this, but they do their annual general meeting, and it's usually a month or two after the end of the year, and that's when they release all their information about coming programs for 2020. Well, for this year it would be 2023, and what happened in 2022, and that's when the expenses and the revenue would be kind of shared to the general public.
But you said they only go 2 years at a time?
Well, no, those sheets that we've been seeing the players post have been posted in 2-year increments. So I think they don't have that sheet available to them.
You don't think they have the 2022 sheet yet?
Not like that.
Come out
no.
yet.
I think they've been told what the revenue expense is. Mm-hmm. Because if they haven't, that's a whole nother issue.
But if they even are being
transparent.
told at this point, the players probably don't believe what the CSB is telling them.
And why would
the CSA.
they? And why would they?
I agree.
Right? Like, at this point, I wouldn't believe anything the CSA has been saying if I was a player.
You just need to see it on paper, and then we could think.
But even then, if it's on paper, who wrote the paper? That would be my question. That would be my question.
There's got to be some other laws then if they're just giving them incorrect
But I agree.
statements.
I agree. But after what we've seen over the past year and a half out in public and much longer not in public, I don't know how these players trust CSA at the moment.
Trust is
at the moment.
Trust is broken at the moment.
Right? But that $5 million in 2021, you and me were talking about it, trying to figure out where it could possibly go. And in the men's statement, they may have kind of alluded to where it could have gone because they mentioned the CSB deal. And I'm not going to get into the details of the men's statement because it's 2 pages long and I don't have time to read that off. But that CSB deal is back in the conversation once again. Just like it was a year ago, just like it was 2 years ago. And it's causing a lot of distrust from the players to CSA. Because it looks like some of the revenue from CSA could be going into that CSB deal. Where, I mean, it has helped us because without the CSB deal, the CPL doesn't exist the way it looks today, which we can agree on. But there's a lot of stuff in that CSB deal that hurts, in my opinion, hurts Canada soccer as a whole.
In what way?
Well, because they're taking money out of the national programs to put into this CSB deal. And now, I don't know the intricacies of the CSB deal to the point where I can tell you this much is coming out and going to the CPL owners, this much is coming out and going to other programs. I don't know the intricacies of that, but there is a potential that more than they assumed was going to come out or more than anyone would approve of has been coming out of Canada soccer going into CSB. And where that money is going in CSB is a whole nother question. But it's a real legitimate concern for these players, the national team players, and even the CPL players, because if there's a disconnect with the CSB deal and them not getting the money put into the league as opposed to it going straight to owners or straight to somebody else around the league. Because I don't even know if the owners are benefiting as much as the men's statement is saying. But the CSB deal is a mess.
You have to assume the CPL owners are taking a hit right now. Like financially, they're not profiting money right now.
If they are profiting money, it's negligible almost, right? Because there's some of the teams do a good job with sales. Some of the teams do a really good job with ticket pricing and everything, right? So there is a legitimate chance that one or two of the owners are making money, but it's almost negligible.
Based off the men's statement, is it safe to say that they're not happy with the money going to CSB and
Absolutely.
then obviously going to CPL?
I think, based on their statement, yes. But I think in the grand scheme of things, both sides, the women's and the men's, the biggest issue is that they don't know where the money's going, right? And part of it is going to the CSB. We know that. But how much of it is going to the CSB? How much of it is being just kind of lost in the shuffle that no one seems to be able to account for? Like, if legitimately that $5 million was excess in 2021, was not used in 2022, that's $5 million that could be going to programs for the national teams or other programs within Canada. And that's an issue that there's no record of where it went.
What are your thoughts then if that $5 million excess, let's just say, all went to the CSB and majority of it benefited the CPL and helped the CPL to continue to grow and prosper?
Right. There's two sides of it, right? How much of it, let's say all $5 million goes to the CSB deal, okay? And folks, this is highly, what's the word I'm looking for? Hypothetical. This is completely hypothetical. I don't think that's the case. But let's say all $5 million went to the CSB deal. My next question then becomes, how much of it went straight to owners for the CPL?
And what if, let's just say all of it, and the reason they give back is, well, we need this money to continue to the league to grow so Canada can have a domestic league, and long term it benefits our national team programs.
Right, and there's definitely a conversation to be had about that. But why is that not common knowledge? I think that more than anything is the issue that everyone is taking with this CSB deal, is that it's so, I don't want to say shady, but it seems kind of shady because the whole deal is kind of shrouded in this, what does this actually mean? Like, we don't know a lot of what happened with that CSB deal because it was done under the table, right? Like,
do you think fans deserve to know all the intricacies of these business deals that are made?
When it impacts, not all of the intricacies, I should say, but when it impacts like national teams and leagues, there should be more transparency than what we're seeing.
I agree. There should be almost 100% transparency between the players and the CSB of knowing all the intricacies of that deal because they're essentially part of the business. They're in the, if this was, you work for Rogers, you got to know all the stuff that's going on, right? But I don't think the fans necessarily have to have the right to know all the intricacies of the deal.
They should, as I'm saying, they should know more than what is being said. Like, we know nothing about that deal. That deal is so shrouded in darkness that no one has any clue what's happening.
How many deals in business that people know where they know how much the expenses are and how much the revenue numbers are and how it's dispersed throughout? That's common knowledge for many other sports business deals.
I'm not saying all of them, but we know what the CBA deal with the NHL is. That was common knowledge. Mm-hmm. We know how the revenue sharing works in the NHL. We know where money comes from in the NHL. They make it pretty obvious.
Is that a North American culture thing? Because I doubt in European soccer that's
a little
they're
different.
As transparent with their funds.
I mean, we know what all the deals are worth in the leagues. There's no salary cap or anything. Teams have to send out their budgets at the end of the year and what the expenses are, and that's why we know that some teams are in the red right now.
Who's we? Fans?
Yeah, we know.
Or media?
No, fans.
Fans know?
Dude, I just became media last year. I knew that Man United was in the red for 2 years in a row at that point. It's common knowledge. Sorry, let me correct that. It's not common knowledge, but it's available.
It's available if you can go research and find it.
You don't even have to look hard. It's there. Mm-hmm. But to be fair, most fans won't look for it. Which is, completely fair because, like, most of the time you don't have to. But when it's a deal like this that has been contested multiple times, and the fact that there's still no common knowledge, that's where I have a little bit of an issue. Mm-hmm. Because there's literally nothing known about this CSB deal other than part of the money goes to the CPL. And they kind of are the business behind the CPL. Right?
Yeah.
That's really all I know about the deal. Mm-hmm. And it's been around for 6 years now?
The CSB? The CSB deal?
Yeah. Is it 5 years or 6? I think it's 6 because I think it was 1 year before the CPL. That's an issue for me. And I can take my media side out of it. I can take my fan side out of it. As an outsider, that seems like an issue. Mm-hmm. And that's why I have such a big red flag go up when the men's and women's side both kind of come out and say, we still don't know where all the funds are going. Because you're right, Niko. Maybe fans don't need to know. But the players inside the organization, the coaching staffs and everything, they should.
Yeah.
Right? We don't need to know. But the fact that they've brought it up multiple times and still don't seem to have any answers, that's where the big red flag goes above my head and be like, okay, we have to talk about this. And I think that's fair.
Are you able to read that line where from the men's national team where they say, speaking about the CSB deal and how the money gets dispersed to the CPL?
Yep. It's long, so you're going to have to you just bear with me.
The second part.
It's the third paragraph.
Second part of the third paragraph.
It's actually the beginning. How Canada Soccer is allocating or using funds is unclear and cloaked in secrecy. Hey, it sounds like what I just said. Despite the funding from FIFA and substantially increased sponsor and fan interest following the men's national team's qualification for and participation in the 2022 World Cup, Canada Soccer's principal revenue streams have been in large part diverted to Canada Soccer business to the benefit of the owners of for-profit minor league professional soccer teams, as reported on extensively by Rick Westhead in 2022, which is true because he did report that back in July. It has been reported that the agreement was never properly approved and that despite having an opportunity to annul or terminate the agreement when its terms were breached by Canada Soccer business, Canada Soccer did not do so. So there was an out for Canada Soccer. They literally had an out. And they didn't take it. Mm-hmm. And again, it just comes back to, A, if you had an out, why didn't you take it? B, why do the players still not really know where everything's going?
And I'm glad you said that. So my next question that has now popped up.
Perfect. I love when you have questions.
Is why the transparency? That'd be the first question I asked.
As it should
CSA, Nick Bontis, whoever's at the top there making these decisions. Why the transparency? Why don't the players know?
You mean lack of transparency, right?
Sorry, correct.
I got you.
Yeah. Why is there the lack of transparency? There's got to be a reason. And then that's from the outside. You have to assume that's like where these negative motives and these assumptions start coming from.
Yeah.
Oh, if they're hiding something, then it must be because they're...
Maybe there's deals coming on the table. That's what people are going to think. No, I don't think that's the case. I hope that's not the case, but I'm also a very positive person. So.
If there's a legitimate business reason as to
then tell us
why, then it's like, okay, just come out and say it. Stop being sorry, don't tell us. But tell them.
Yeah, sorry. We're in the spot of the players. That's what I mean, sorry. Like tell the players.
So then they
stop bringing it up.
Stop bringing it up, and then people are kind of assuming, and it's, again, like I said earlier, he said, she said.
Yeah. We're in high school drama right now. It's awful.
Feels like it.
It's awful. We got to take another break here, Niko.
Let me ask you another
quick.
What are your thoughts about the wording with the men's national team? I've seen this conversation a lot on Twitter. I'm obviously in the CPL. Does it hurt me that much? No. It's
you're very thick-skinned though. So.
It's words on a piece of paper, but you being a fan of the CPL, like, how did you find the wording?
Yeah, I wasn't a huge fan of the wording, especially because we know that the CPL is important for the growth of the game in Canada and the growth of the national team programs as a whole.
And you'd hope the players can see that as well.
And you hope the players can see that. I think the way it was worded, like really thinking about it, I think the way it was worded was just trying to attack the CSB deal, not the league itself, but it just came across poorly. And I think if they probably had a chance to go back and redo the wording of just that statement, they might, but it's not. And honestly, I also read it wrong the first time because I read it as semi-pro league in my head. I don't know why. That's not what they said. They said it's a for-profit minor league professional soccer teams. So that's a different thing in my head, and I'm glad that you brought that up to me today because I legitimately thought it's in semi-pro league, and I'm like, that's not right. What could it have been worded better? Absolutely.
Yeah, I think what they were the reason why they worded it like that, and you're right. I don't think the players are against the CPL or.
No. Some of them played in the CPL.
Yeah. But I think what they were trying to make the point of is like how much more significant their team is to the grand scheme.
Yeah.
And they are a much bigger entity compared to the CPL.
Which is true.
Which is fair enough. So I think that's why they used the wording that way. Again, could they have used different wording? Maybe. But let's not I think the only thing they needed to include in that is the for-profit part.
to really stick it to the fact that it was the CSB is making money off of it instead of putting money into the program. Yeah. I think that's where they should have left it. For-profit professional soccer clubs.
Yeah, but there's something wrong going on here, but let's not get too hurt by some words that they describe the CPL. I think it's safe to assume.
Don't forget, they probably had to write this really quickly to get the statement out with the women's team.
I'm sure they had some legal help to
yeah, they did. Well, they did, but it still had to be done pretty hastily. That's my guess.
Strategic wording, and again, if it helps them get something done, I'm okay with taking some crossfire shots.
But the thing is, it's also probably going to help the CPL. If they get something done properly, it probably helps the league down the line too.
Ooh, that one's tough because essentially right now they are not happy with CPL getting funding of any sort from their success.
Right. But I'm saying if they get something sorted out properly, not just we want all the money and take it away or whatever, then the growth from both sides, because I think the men's national team and the men's program knows how important the CPL is to the developmental path for Canadian players. Eventually, it could be bigger. So they know they don't want to destroy the league, but there has to be something that works for both sides. So we got to take that break now. On the other side, we will talk about what this could mean moving forward for both the men's and women's national team. You're listening to Footy First here on TSN 1050. Welcome back to Footy First here on TSN 1050. Nick McVicar, Niko Giantsopoulos. Stop laughing.
What a song.
Stop
Took me
laughing.
Back to 1950 or something.
Oh, my goodness. All right. Well, it's been a pretty serious conversation we've had today, and we still got one more serious segment to get through. But we talked about how we got to this point. We talked about what the major issues are. Now let's kind of dive into what we expect to happen over the coming days, weeks, months for both the men's and women's side as well as Canada Soccer. Because there's a meeting going on this morning, whether it's already happened, whether it's happening as we speak, whether it's happening in an hour. We don't really know because that wasn't really divulged to anybody. But there's a meeting going on between the women's national side and Canada Soccer. What do you think is going to come out of this, Niko? As someone who has been in bargaining agreements as a player, you have more knowledge on this than me.
I don't think either side is going to get exactly what they want. There's going to be a collaboration, and they're going to come down to the middle. But I don't know which side and it's impossible to guess, really. It's going to be very difficult. It's going to be very strenuous. Yeah. Do I think they're going to play in the She Believes Cup? No, I don't think so. I think it's too quick of a turnaround. Yeah, because
that starts on Saturday.
And essentially, that's what happened last year with the men's team when they kind of settled that Nations League game.
Well,
then they jumped back into it, and then it seems, here we are today, that nothing was really solved.
Nothing's really solved.
And I think the women's team are going to notice that, and they're going to be thinking, okay, we need to be a bit firmer, a bit stronger in our stance here. The men's team never said we're going on strike. The women's team are using the term strike now. And I just can't see an agreement.
They're technically using the word job action.
You're right. Sinclair did say that.
I've never once heard a team member say strike, but they're using job action and not participating in Canada Soccer activities.
Well, they've been probably speaking to some excellent lawyers and are using the proper legal terms.
Probably.
So for that reason, I think it's just too quick of a turnaround time that they're going to be able to get a deal done. And
do you think they can play in any of the games in the She Believes Cup, or do you think the She Believes Cup is out of the question?
Well, I think then that's going to be more a question on the people who run the She Believes Cup. It's like, okay, if you just miss the first game, are we just going to allow you to enter in the tournament after that?
It's a 4-team invitation-only tournament, right? Like, that's the big thing is, like, it's an invitation-only tournament for some of the best nations in the world. So they would obviously want the reigning Olympic champions to be there as the She Believes Cup. So if they forfeit the first game, like...
And again, that's where it's like, if this was a World Cup, you can't just miss the first game. Like, I'll play the second and the third. It doesn't work like that. But because it's the She Believes Cup, maybe they're just able to understand what's going on behind the scenes, and then She Believes Cup officials will allow it.
Potentially, that could be the case, right? Yeah. Like I could see that potentially happening, but I don't know if it does. The question was more geared to you. Do you think that they could get something done in time to play those second and third games? That was more how I was trying to phrase the question. I misphrased it. I apologize, buddy.
Not to the expectations that I think the women's national team are looking to get, and I think if they personally feel that it's unjust and it's completely unfair that what's going on, stand strong, be firm, stand strike, and hopefully you're not missing out on the World Cup. Because CSA, let's play hardball now. If I'm the women's national team, stay strong. If you don't got to play in the She Believes Cup, so be it. And if you're able to get what you think is fair, then go ahead and do it. I think that's the stance they need to do, because the men one game, then they continued to play, had a World Cup, excellent experience, and now here we are maybe 6-7 months later.
Not even.
And it seems like the problem is resolved. So the women have to notice that if they kind of fold, that chances are the CSA aren't going to abide by what they want. And then it's just going to be a circle. We're just going to keep revisiting this conversation, and no answers are ever going to be made, and no deals are ever going to be made. And it's just going to be this drama that's continue going on in Canada soccer and tarnishing Canada soccer in the global game. Because now this is global news. Canada soccer is kind of looking a bit silly, in my opinion, and I don't like all this negative attention.
The funny thing is that we aren't the first nation to do this. The U.S. did the exact same thing a few years ago with their women's team. They went to court because of it. Right? So it's not like we're the first nation, but we look bad right now. Like, this doesn't look good on Canada soccer or the Canadian soccer market as a whole. It just doesn't look good.
U.S. soccer looked bad when that whole situation was going on as well. It's just not a good look.
It's not good.
And it's like the global game of soccer, football, when they look at these associations, it almost looks a bit silly, because I don't see it happening in other much bigger associations.
And what association is going to want to schedule a game with Canada if at this point they seem to miss games every once in a while because of these issues? They don't know when they're going to miss games, right? Like, we were talking about getting better friendlies for the men's team, right? The women's team hasn't really had issues booking friendlies because they're a top 5 nation in the world, other than the fact that they just don't want to book friendlies because they're trying to save money. Different issue. Clearly I was right. But the men's team, how many men's nations are going to be like, oh, yeah, we'll book with Canada? Because we don't know if they're even going to play.
Well, that's the risk, right? And there's so much money involved in these games, these friendlies, that they don't want to agree to something, and then potentially the CSB, all this issues going on, falls through, and then the game can't happen, and the money is lost.
Well, I mentioned the men's team because they are 100% behind their women counterparts on this. That was what their statement said, and they're going to back them. They have a Nations League game in March. That was, by the way, just announced it's going to be played in Toronto. So,
playing Honduras?
Is it Honduras? I can't remember off the top of my head, so I don't want to. Don't quote me on that, because I'm trying not to get myself caught today. But the game's being held March 18th here in Toronto. What are the odds if this isn't sorted? If the women miss the She Believes Cup and things are still bad, that the men sit out that game?
It's just a friendly?
No, it's a Nations League game.
It's another Nations League game.
Another Nations League game.
What are the implications if we don't do well in Nations League because we qualify for the World Cup?
Don't qualify for Gold Cup.
And how tough would it be? And that's
a drastic answer, because I still think we could qualify by missing a game or two. But that, like, if you struggle in qualifying, you don't qualify for the Gold Cup, which is, and we talked about it last time, that's our Euro, right? Mm-hmm. Like, it's not as prestigious as the Euro. I'm aware of that fact. The teams aren't as good as the Euro Cup, but it's our Euro, and it's important to win your Continental Cup.
Yeah, CONCACAF.
You have to be in your Continental Cup at the very least to be taken seriously as a nation. So these Nation League games, while they are qualifying games, and there's a lot of them, and you're playing lesser opponents because it is qualifying, they're still important. So what are the odds that actually happens? Like, they stand pat and be like, listen, we're not playing in this game because we support what's going on with the women's program.
I think it's very possible.
Yeah.
I think it's very possible, but I bet you at the same time the men are hoping this deal gets done before then, because then that's another very difficult decision that the men's team has to make.
And they don't want to.
No matter how much they're supporting the women's team, you can't put aside that's an extremely difficult decision to make for the program, because we just spoke of the implications it can have globally to the CSA and then the men's reputation as well.
Yeah, it's not good. It's not good at all. It's a messy situation, and it could devolve over the year. Like, She Believes Cup is a big international tournament. Nations League is a major stepping stone to a big international tournament for the men's, and the Women's World Cup. Those are three major international windows or opportunities that could be impacted by what happens over the next few days and few weeks.
It's crucial, though, that if it gets to the point where a deal still isn't, or a solution isn't resolved between the two, that if when that men's game comes around and the men's team play, I'm thinking as a fan that they're not generally supporting as much as they say they are in that page that we seen.
Yeah, so, if nothing's sorted by then, they have to put their foot down and say we're not playing.
Because if they don't, then
this is all just words.
And then the women's team is going to be thinking, okay, maybe you don't really have our back.
Yeah.
And again, such a difficult decision to have.
And it's so tough. Like, this is legitimately it's such a messy situation. So we're going to have to see how it plays out. Is there anything else you want to add before we take our last break here, Niko?
No, again, it's throughout the next probably the weekend, especially once this conversation that's currently happening
once we see
out,
more that comes out.
Way more news is going to come out again. I would just advise most people to not jump to conclusions just yet. It's good to be knowledgeable and see both sides, but let's be patient and see what comes out of it. And again, hopefully, for Canada Soccer's sake, fans of the game here, that the best possible situation comes out of it, and both parties are happy. We don't want the player pool to be ecstatic, and then CSA is like, this is a terrible deal. We completely got bodied here, and now we're struggling as business. Yeah. We need both sides to be continuing to prosper and continue to grow.
And continue to work together.
100%.
I think that's the big thing.
They will not continue. It seems like they haven't been working together.
No, but I mean,
start working together.
I mean, after the deal is put in place, to continue to work together after.
Yeah.
That's how I meant it in my head. Okay, we're going to take our last break. On the other side, we got some more lighthearted stuff that we'll get into. You're listening to Footy First here on TSN 1050. Welcome back to Footy First here on TSN 1050. McVicar and Niko Giantsopoulos. We got like 30 seconds here, Niko, to wrap up the show. So, quickly, Zats had a very successful first couple weeks here in Poland, eh?
Yeah, he did excellent. They're playing currently right now.
Yeah.
So he's played now 3 games off the start right away.
Yep.
He's actually playing right back, which is a bit of a shock. But for some reason, every single time Zats goes out to Europe, when he went out on loan to the Swedish second division, he played right back. And now it seems like he's starting right back for Corona Kelso as well. They won. They lost their first game 3-2. The second game they won, and they got Team of the Week.
Yeah.
Which is a huge accomplishment.
Fantastic.
Currently, now they're playing their third game, and they are down 1-0 right now. Hopefully, they can at least get a tying goal, because, again, they're in that relegation battle.
And quickly, we want to give shout-out to Mason Trafford as well.
Mason Trafford announced his retirement. I had the privilege to play with him. I sent him a quick message and told him that. But excellent guy, excellent captain, excellent player, and kudos to Calgary to helping him transition into life after soccer, as now he is the director of something commercial.
Yes, commercial. Yes. That'll do it for us here this week. If you missed the episode, check us out on YouTube or wherever you get your favorite podcast. For Niko Giantsopoulos, I'm Nick McVicar. We'll see you next time.